It is 6 o'clock. Call to order the May 28th, 2026 meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. Can we get a roll call, please?
Okay, Director Cassidy.
Here.
Chief.
Here.
Angford.
Here.
Largay.
Here.
Perry.
Here.
Pollock.
Here.
Russ.
Here.
Wimp. Do not see Director Lincoln. Spencer Hill.
Here.
And we have alternate Director Stiles, who is acting as a voting member this evening.
Here. Okay, great, thank you. Are there any additions or deletions to the regular agenda? Okay, hearing none. We have a moment here for oral communications for matters not on the agenda. To our vast online audience, and anyone else here? I think Greg Wimp is walking in the door.
Okay, and I also see alternate Director Jeff. Is the viewing member this evening, but I want to acknowledge she's among the remote attendees, and Director Wimp is here.
Okay, anyone, so no one is
No hand
stepping
up.
forward for normal communication, all right? We have the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion for that?
So moved.
Second. All those, do we have enough people to do this locally? Do we have to have a roll call vote?
We don't have any remote participants,
Okay.
so we can do we do not have to do a roll call.
Okay, all those in favor? Anyone opposed?
I abstained because I wasn't here.
There you go. So it is unanimous with one abstention. Are you good with the minutes?
Yes,
Did you vote yes?
I would.
Okay, that's unanimous with one abstention.
Oh, my God said I'm useless.
Okay, we have presentation, a more sustainability program update. Now, we're up.
A very short, happy spring presentation. Who's like to do this in the spring as we're coming out of the wet season? Today notwithstanding, we usually get all the precipitation we get for the water here.
One moment,
There's a miracle May, could be a jump in June, you never know. It's happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Giants could use some rainouts.
Yeah. Those minutes play.
I'm gonna see if I can move that voucher. I'm not quite sure why. So we can see if that's a settings issue on the one.
Okay, so at any rate, typically look at the water year. Boulder Creek typically receives about 50 inches of rain per year. This year, we received about 38 inches, so that's 76%. That's not too bad compared to the previous year, only 32 inches, 64. And if we look at San Lorenzo River flow for this time of year, mid-May, you can see the last 3 years kind of translating. We had this nice 2024, we were at 87 CFS, 25 dropped down to 56, and this year we're up to 72. So it kind of coincides with that precipitation nicely. It's a good place to be starting the year in terms of flows in our river systems. Go ahead, Tim. So translating some of that rain that we received, we'll take a look at some water levels. And again, traditionally, we've been looking at our shallower Santa Margarita system, traditionally unconfined, and then our deeper confined systems, the Monterey, Lompico, Botano. And we have some representative monitoring wells that we've been looking at since SMGWA passed in 2015. And again, the red dots represent the spring water levels. That's what I like to pay attention to because that's going to start the demand season. So we've got to look at where we're at when that's occurring. And we can see each of these with the measurable objectives, minimum thresholds that we've established in the groundwater sustainability plan. And kind of comparing to last year, we're just a little bit down from last year. That's not bad for 2 dry years in a row. It's a pretty good place to start the season at in most of these wells. No major concerns as we go through the sort of full demand season. We should end up in very good shape. We're not really expecting to have any, what we call an MT exceedance, dropping down below our minimum thresholds. Olympia 3, I'll point out, we're actually a little bit higher, but you can see the variability, and this is because it's an active production well. So a lot of times we're gonna get a running level. That's not really ideal for a sustainability well that we're reporting to the state. So we'll talk about that later. We're proposing to change that. We've been talking about it a little bit. Go ahead, Tim. And then in the deeper confined zones, again, Lompico has really kind of been recovering. Still in a lot of locations because in particular, Santa Rosa Valley has been able to, on an emergency basis, get water down into that system. So they've been able to continue to rest their wells. So despite it being drier than usual, we've had recovery in the Lompico area down here. Pretty stable. Monterey Formation, we're no longer using it. We only have one production well there traditionally. That's been offline for years now, and we can see it's just a slow and steady increase through time. And the Cannon well and the Batano kind of outside of the system has a very slight decline, about a half foot per year over the last 10 years or so. So it's nothing alarming, but it is continuing to trend down, still well above the minimum threshold. An update on Department of Water Resources. So you know that we're participating in the small GSA coalition. We had another meeting with what they call the SMGWA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office, to talk about what they're doing to help streamline annual reports. So it continues to be a focus for us trying to get our costs down. So they're pretty excited. They have a consultant that's working on a tool right now that data can be uploaded into the Sigma portal. And their intent is to have enough data uploaded with some explanations as necessary to not require a full written report next year. So they expect to have some beta stuff out here later in the summer, early fall. They're going to be working with a few groups, including the small GSAs, for us to pilot that out, test it out, see how it's working. So pretty exciting news on that front. DWR did hold a Prop 4 funding workshop on April 30th. I wouldn't say it was very exciting statewide. You know, the bond, there's very limited dollars in a lot of these pots. One of the exciting things was through the small GSA coalition, we talked about this last year, we were able to get legislation that specifically identified $3.5 million to go towards small GSAs for Sigma compliance activities. So it won't be a big grant because there's quite a few of us, but it won't be anything to sneeze at either. It'll help offset some of the costs that we have ongoing right now with part of the periodic evaluation. So DWR in that workshop disclosed that they're trying to fast track that particular program because it's only meant for small GSAs and try to get something out, I'd say in the next 6 months to 9 months, which is pretty fast in grant world time. So again, I think more good news. There will be a remaining of Sigma funding coming out in early 2027. It is $320 million statewide. Then you can expect a lot of that to go towards really large basins in the Central Valley and critically overdrafted basins. So not sure there's a lot of opportunity for this basin coming out of that, but you know, really for us to help offset some of our ongoing compliance costs would be very helpful. And that is my update. Any questions?
So that is a pretty good chunk of funding for, you know, I mean, that's 30 plus $10 million projects or 50, $7 million projects. Do you think there would be a traditional grant solicitation for that? If so, is that something that this body would apply for, or what the water districts or the city would apply for?
That would that $320 million would be expected to go out to groundwater sustainability agencies for the large part. It would be an open solicitation. So even though we'll be pursuing the small GSA funding again at some point here in the next hopefully several months, we would be eligible to pursue that.
Just a matter of having a proposal that can score.
It's a good project, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just am so impressed that you guys got the government to recognize the problems with the small GSAs. I thought you guys were tilting it with windmills. It's great.
I think what helped was they also recognized that this would help the large GSAs.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something that was so far out, right? That it was really just taking care of a small class. So it was helping us getting what we wanted, but I think they recognize there's really broad benefits. So
Good job.
didn't hurt. Yeah, thanks.
Do you, for the $3.5 million that's available for the small GSAs, do you think there's a preferred way of approaching it? I mean, Are they looking for a particular problem that a small GSA is having aside from just budget? You know, or what do you think they're
Well,
trying to fund?
we want to believe that they heard us. When we met last year, we were just getting everybody, all the 10 GSAs that we've been working with. There might be around 20 or so GSAs that are eligible for this funding. You know, we told them that even going through this periodic evaluation was a challenge, right, with the expense, and we considered that to be Sigma implementation, right? It's not just planning for us. This is something they're making us do. So we think that they heard us. We did request that they backdate it to when the legislation passed, which was last September. So expenses from that period would be eligible. And we also, of course, as I said, expect that these types of activities, the model update that we're doing, the GSP amendment, those would be eligible for reimbursement from this. So they do anticipate, you know, there'll be relatively small awards. You can kind of think somewhere in the $200,000 to $300,000 range, depending on how many apply. But I do think they're going to try to streamline the application process and make it somewhat non-competitive in the same way that they did this for critically overdrafted basins a few years ago, where basically the intent was to try to get that out broadly. And each one of those basins got a $7.6 million award. And you had to meet the bar, right? You had to have a successful application, but you weren't necessarily competing against the others. The 320 million, that'll be open, you know, competition, so.
Thank you, Bill.
Great, thank you very much, Rob, and I want to thank Sierra especially because she was in the beginning of this, way back when all of this started, before we even had the great talents of Rob and Tim. But anyway,
Yes.
proposed budget is, Tim, you gonna take this?
I have this.
John.
I have this one, and then I did review it and prepare it with John Dillon, our treasurer's assistant, so John can certainly add to it as we're going throughout, but I'm gonna start, and I'm gonna just a second, I'm gonna share my screen so the folks online view this. And I'm gonna do a review of the table that is in the budget packet. So it's on page 14 of the budget packet, if you have that. And I'm gonna project that so folks online can see. And I'll try to get some of this stuff out of the way here. Let's appear. There we go. Okay.
Before you start, I just want to apologize, because in the middle of Rob's report, we're lucky enough to have two members of the public drop in. So I should have asked if you had any comment about what Rob was saying, but you kind of came in the middle, so you made. Okay.
missed the first part.
I know, great. But this part you get from the beginning, so.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so this budget is gonna look familiar to those of you who are at the February meeting. That's when we present the preliminary budget for next year, and now we're bringing you back the proposed budget. So just for because we may have some new folks in the room and online to orient ourselves, we've got our major budget categories along the left here. I'm going to go through this. So we've got our reserves, operating revenue, operating expense, and then our ending reserves for the year. And across the columns, we have our actuals from fiscal year 2024, 2025. We have our approved budget for the current year that the board passed last May. And then we have the revised and projected budget that I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. This is based upon our expenses through March 31st of this year, and then best projection through June 30th of this year at where we think we'll land. And then we have our proposed budget for next year that I'm going to talk about. And just for reference, we have the increase or decrease relative to the prior approved year budget. So I'm going to start with the revised and projected budget. And I mentioned this at the last meeting as well, but I just want to reiterate it, right? We're bringing this budget for approval at this time, right? May, a month or so in advance of the actual end of the fiscal year. So when we brought the budget last year, at the time, it was, our best estimate of where we thought we were gonna end up in terms of operating expenses from last year. And that impacts our beginning reserves, because the ending reserves from the prior fiscal year then become your beginning reserves for the next year. And so you'll notice that the approved budget, we had beginning reserves at 335,000. We did not expend as much in terms of operating expenses last year as we projected. We thought some of the periodic evaluation and some of the other technical costs for activity last year was going to be higher. It was not. And so as a result of that, our beginning reserves are higher. We have three categories there. We've got our general reserves, and then we have two designations. We have our periodic evaluation designation. We know that's a significant cost, and so we have been setting aside money for that purpose. And we also had funding mechanism evaluation. That's 25,000. And so let me work my way through the revised and projected, and then I'll come back to those beginning reserves for next year. In terms of the operating revenue for the current fiscal year, no changes there. Those contributions have already been made, so that's the 451,000. I'm going to jump ahead here to the next year's budget, because Rob was just talking about the Department of Water Resources grants. We have budgeted conservatively, so we do not have any revenue coming in from those grants. Hopefully, that will work on the expedited timeframe that DWR alluded to, and there's the potential that maybe some of those funds come in. I think it's pretty unlikely, because typically the DWR grants are on a reimbursement basis, and so it always takes a while to get your grant agreement set up. And then you go through a period when you're actually incurring those expenses. And so that process is it always takes time. So I think it's more realistic not to include those funds, but it would be great if they do come through. And if they do, we'll certainly, when you see this revised budget again in February or next May, it'll reflect those. In terms of our operating expenses, the biggest change here, and this is in part into some of the discussion, the direction we got at the last board meeting, we had questions about the administrative services costs. And so at the time I mentioned that, and this goes back a number of years, the admin costs included all of the services from the Regional Water Management Foundation, both admin as well as all of the GSP planning and implementation support. And so that's reflected still in this current year budget. Going forward with next year's budget, we have split those costs out. So you're going to see, when we're looking at fiscal year 2027, the reduction there in costs. A large part of that cost, the principal thing that is driving that, is that we have reallocated, right, the planning and implementation support tasks into technical services. And so I'm gonna get into the technical services detail in just a minute and pull up a separate table, but just wanted to acknowledge that we still have the treasurer services coming from Scotts Valley Water District. And then in prior years, we had this general administrative category, which was a catch-all, relatively small amount, but covers a variety of miscellaneous, both office supplies and subscriptions and insurance costs, all of those things. Going forward from next year's budget, we are capturing that under the administrative budget cost as opposed to a standalone category. So in terms of the technical costs, I'm going to jump to a different page in the packet because these are broken out in more detail. This is the largest single category within the operating expenses. And so it includes that first line there. And I added the fiscal year 2026 approved budget. Again, this wasn't how this was presented when this got approved last year, but I included this number in here just because for ease of comparison, when we're looking at this revised and projected for the current year and then the proposed for next year. We have the GSP implementation costs. The revised and projected is slightly lower than the approved budget. And that is really driven more by the timing of when we think those costs are gonna hit. It's not that that overall amount has gone down. It's that some of the work on both the periodic evaluation and the amendment are going to happen after July 1, and so they're getting captured in next year's amount. Slight increase in the GSP annual report as mentioned. It's gonna be a new format for next year. Hopefully, in the long term, this number goes the other direction and is driven down as that report becomes more efficient, but we're not there yet. A slightly higher amount budgeted for next year. That also includes the twice a year annual reporting of all of the basin monitoring data that's required under SMGWA. We're still keeping some funds for monitoring equipment and other professional services. We have a data management system that I've talked about in the past. This is a coordinated effort between this basin and the neighboring Santa Cruz Mid-County groundwater basin. Again, slightly higher for next year as we're in the final year of that DMS contract. And we're going to be doing some assessment of whether or not we're going to stick with that same vendor and platform going forward or not. And then a couple significant ones, or one in particular significant, is that there's no funding proposed for stream monitoring. This is going to be discussed more when we get to the ad hoc committee. That's one of the issues that they looked at in doing that. But essentially, you know, we feel at this point the data collection that has occurred has adequately established that relationship or that understanding between contributions from stream base flow during the dry season and the sort of underlying wet dry conditions in the basin. So the nature of that relationship at this point, we don't think it requires ongoing stream monitoring. There are mechanisms in place that Rob will talk about more, where there's still ongoing monitoring by some of the member agencies and by the city of Santa Cruz, and some mechanisms in place so that could be resumed, that could resume as needed based upon conditions, but we're not proposing it for next year. So so you're seeing that reflected in the budget there. And then similarly, this goes back to the budget table. So give me just a second, I'm going to scroll back to the overall table because you see this reflected as a designated fund within the beginning reserves, and because it was not spent this year, you're seeing it also reflected in the ending reserves, that funding mechanisms evaluation. This was also a topic of discussion amongst the GSP ad hoc committee, and at this point, we are not recommending that evaluation occur at this time. So those funds were set aside for a consultant to come in and assess the long-term funding mechanisms, and based upon the feedback from the committee, that's not being recommended at this point. And so that's why when we're looking at the fiscal year 2027 budget, that 25,000 has gone away. It does not disappear, it just simply gets folded into the beginning general reserves. So that 230 at the top incorporates that. As a result of the reduction in some of the expenses relative to the budget that you saw in February, the contributions from the member agencies are lower than they were in February. We had a question last time about, well, how is it that your operating revenue is less than your operating expenses? That is a result of continuing to draw down these beginning reserves. And so we mentioned the reserves had accumulated over time, in part from grant reimbursements, in part just from the member agency contributions, and then probably most significantly in recent years as a result of the board having established a target reserve policy. And so the board's approved policy is to set the general reserve target at 20% of the operating expenses. And so jumping ahead to the lower part of the table here, you can see that our ending reserves at 103 they're slightly higher than 20%, but they're very close to that 20%. And that's one of the tools that we are using is looking at, okay, where are we with our general reserve policy relative to our overall operating expenses? And then that helps to inform how much we are asking for in terms of contributions from the member agencies. So, relative, just by way of comparison between the approved budget from the current fiscal year and next year, you can see, generally decreases across the board. So there's that column over on the far right there. We're looking at 13% in reserves overall, 29% decrease in operating revenue, 18% decrease in expenses. And then again, as we've drawn down the reserves over time, a more significant drop overall on the ending reserves next year. So we are in the midst, as you know, and as you're going to hear more about, of wrapping up this first 5-year periodic evaluation and amendment. So it's a significant amount of work that's happening this year and a portion of next year. We had a question at the last meeting again about looking at a multi-year budget cycle. And so as part of that periodic evaluation, we do have to do a long-range budget in there. So I think it includes both a 5-year and a longer-term budget projection. And so that I will come back to the board as a part of the overall periodic evaluation that's happening as a part of this process. So let me pause there and see if John Dillon wants to add anything on any of this, or if there's questions from the board members on any of that. So, John, let's get that. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, nothing to add on my part. I reviewed everything and it agrees with what I've seen as the treasurer, so.
Okay, great.
Anything from the board?
He answered the question.
Okay, very good.
I just, I guess, as part of my education, professional services that are proposed, I guess, for next fiscal year, you're now showing 311,000, which was detailed on page 14, the breakdown of that. Is that, I guess I'm just trying to understand, is that mostly gonna be done by Montgomery and Associates? And the work that the RWMA does, that's captured in admin, or is there a mix of both? I'm just not sure what the division is of work here.
Yeah, so I can show you within the technical services category, the work that the Regional Water Management Foundation, this is the contract that we have with the county to support both this basin and the neighboring Mid-County Groundwater Agency. That includes a task for GSP planning and implementation. So that first line here represents RWMF staff costs to support that effort. The next line here, the GSP periodic evaluation and the GSP annual report both reflect costs from Montgomery and Associates, which the board is contracted to provide the hydrologic support services. And then I mentioned the miscellaneous costs for monitoring equipment, that's as needed. The data management system is with a firm called Kisters. That's also via County of Santa Cruz contract because the county participates as a member agency in both of the groundwater sustainability agencies. So that's the picture in terms of technical services. In terms of the administrative services, those are, essentially as shown here, those are RWMF staff costs there, Scotts Valley Water District, which serves as a treasurer, and then just the miscellaneous expenses that fall under general administrative.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess what threw me for a loop, and I still don't quite get it, is that Montgomery is asking for 150,000 contract, which kind of matches, I guess, these two, the 110 and the 45. But in the letter that was included in the board package, it also refers to 105,000 for the periodic evaluation and GSP amendment. So I'm not sure, is that a subset of the 150, or are they two separate amounts? I don't understand the two,
Yeah,
the two
so
numbers.
we have a subsequent item on here to essentially approved the year 4 services from Montgomery and Associates. And so going back 3 years ago, the board put out a request for qualifications to provide hydrologic support services that include the, GSP periodic evaluation, the annual reporting, some other Sigma related support tasks. That contract was awarded, but the way that it was done is Montgomery would come back each year and propose a specific scope of work for that fiscal year. And so they've done that for 3 years under the agency's procurement policy. We are able to utilize the firm for up to 5 years. So this would be year 4 of those proposed services. And so the work that is on the subsequent item in here basically lays out what they think they will be doing, July 1st onward. They may be hitting, they should all be captured under technical services here, so we can double check that our, that the amounts align, but I believe they're consistent with what's in the table, but we can certainly double check. And what will drive it is, well, for their purposes, what's going to drive it is their contracted scope of work and the not to exceed total that's laid out there.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, anybody else? Anything from the public? Questions? Okay, all right, thank you.
I'm
Yes.
curious about the cessation of the stream monitoring. Who could I follow up with about that?
We're gonna hear a big conversation when Rob goes to do his report on the periodic evaluation. So, yeah, he's gonna. And you can grill him. Okay, so that takes us to Rob.
Well, actually,
Oh, we need a motion.
Yes.
I so move we approve the proposed budget for fiscal year 2027.
Who's gonna second that?
Second.
Okay, Bob, okay, or Dale? Bob. I'm gonna give it to Bob.
Okay.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, none opposed, it's unanimous. Let's move on to 4.2. So Rob, update on the groundwater sustainability plan, periodic evaluation, and the amendment.
You're supposed to offer apologies in advance. This may run a little long.
Oh. So this may run a little long. It's really good at keeping things on track.
Bearing in mind, this is replacing having separate meetings to cover this, so we're being very efficient with your time. We do appreciate the ad hoc committee that's been working with us on this. So the ad hoc committee has met 3 times, about 2 hours apiece, so 6 hours of meetings with a lot of work in between. So it's been a pretty significant effort. So just a quick reminder, when you're doing an evaluation and GSP amendment process, we didn't just make this up. The state released guidelines in 2023 that talks about the things that you have to address when you're going through your first periodic evaluation, which again is due every 5 years. So first and foremost, you have to address any recommended corrective actions or RCAs as they're said. So when the state approved our plan, they told us these 4 major RCAs that we had to address when we went through the next periodic evaluation. That may or may not, depending on your basin, require that you update your plan. I can tell you ours did, right? So, and again, we're gonna go through a lot of that as to why we're amending the plan as well. You have to go through your projects and management actions that you addressed in your groundwater sustainability plan. Which ones are you doing? Why or why not, et cetera. You have to review your monitoring network. And that part of that was the stream network, of course, groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring and groundwater monitoring, and address other items that you put in your groundwater sustainability plan. Things like, were you planning on putting meters in or were you planning on charging fees? So address those. So we've used an ad hoc committee. The plan is to continue using that even after this meeting, to continue to talk about things that we're updating and get more feedback and coming back to the board where decisions are made on those recommendations. So I'm going to take things out of order. I think sort of in order of importance and maybe in order of complexity. That way, as you're kind of dozing off it towards the end of it, you'll have heard the most important stuff. Recommended corrective action number 1 for was to evaluate interconnected surface water sustainable management criteria, or SMC as they're called. And specifically, the state said in what we defined as undesirable result, we had to remove the exemption for drought conditions. The state doesn't want you to have a drought exception for undesirable results. They want you to find undesirable results that account for going through drought periods. So they want you to take a different approach. They also said to consider using their guidance as appropriate when it comes out. So the state released a series of 3 technical papers over the course of a year, the last one coming out September of 2024. And they said our guidance will be out any day now. And for those of you that go to things like the semi-annual aqua meeting, it's coming, right, the next time around. Still not out. However, the state has, I think, given some of their position on certain issues and topics, and I've had an opportunity to speak with some of their technical staff about an approach that I think we should go ahead and do now, rather than wait for that to come out. I can't guarantee you 100% it will be successful, but I have a pretty strong feeling that it's an approach that I think sort of sounded good to the technical staff that I've met with the DWR. So you have to take 2 lines of reasoning when it comes to depletion of interconnected surface water. So the concept is when you pump groundwater, at some point, it's going to affect flow in surface water. Now, if you're in the Central Valley, you are pulling water directly from the system because all groundwater is below the streams there. We have a situation where our groundwater is above the streams because of the topography. And so we're feeding the streams, right? So when we pump groundwater, that may result in a lower flow, but it's never going to dry the stream out, right? So it's depleting. That's still considered a depletion, a loss of net flow in the system. And that's why we spent so much time monitoring during the dry season. We wanted to characterize how much is the groundwater feeding the streams after we get the last rain. So one concept when it comes to depletion is how much are you pumping? And one of the points that the state has repeatedly made is with respect to depletion, your point of compliance is when Sigma passed, January 1st of 2015. So you may have been depleting a stream at that point, and that's okay to continue as long as you don't increase that depletion. Okay, so that's a very important point. So point number 1 that I made with the state was look at the groundwater extraction in our basin. So I have this out. We have 40 years worth of data here broken down into 5-year intervals. So those numbers up top represent the pumping for that 5-year period. And we can see in the early 2000s, we were extracting that 5-year period of 4,400 acre feet. Then we were at 4,500 acres, 4,492. And then we started dropping in the late 2000s, 2007 or so, down to 3,800 acre feet. And then the 5 years leading up to Sigma, we were extracting an average of 3,200 acre feet. So we've already been reducing extraction of the basin pretty significantly from water efficiency measures that have been taken in the region. So post Sigma, if you look at the latest 5-year average, we're below 2,600 acre feet. We've already reduced our groundwater extraction by 20% from when Sigma passed. So that's important point number 1. Now the state would then say, well, that's great. You know, that is important to us, but where you're pumping matters too, right? So I could say, well, I'm pumping 2,600 acre feet. And if that's broadly distributed around the basin, that's going to affect streams in one way. I could take and put 2 wells right next to the San Lorenzo River and pump 2,600 acre feet in a very concentrated way. And I would be affecting the stream very differently at that point, right? So where you're pumping matters too, okay? So that introduces concept number 2. So the second component, and again, this is a common way, and it's in part a way that we were approaching it, is to look at groundwater levels with reference to the stream. And what we have done is we've identified currently just 2 wells that are near a stream, and we had planned on adding a few more. And most basins are focused in on putting a single well very close to a stream and monitoring what's happening in those levels. But the state would argue, and especially in a large basin, that even if you're monitoring right next to the stream, you could be pulling water levels down somewhere miles away. And at some point, that water has to come from somewhere. It's all connected. And so for them, it matters all about your distribution. And in our case, just an example, this is the Santa Margarita Aquifer. We have wells all over the place, nicely distributed. And what we could do is look at those wells in their totality. So instead of using the ones that are just next to the stream, look at all of them. And what this is an example of is this is a contour of the groundwater surface. It's just below the surface. You don't see it, but you can think of it just as you're out looking at a contour map of the mountains, right? It defines some sort of a surface. In this case, it's the groundwater. And groundwater, just like out, you know, in the real world, if you move perpendicular to these contour lines, you're going downhill, right? So groundwater flows perpendicular to these lines downhill. And ultimately what happens is, in just at these various locations, it intercepts into, or it flows into a stream. Bean Creek, San Lorenzo River, Ziente, Newell Creek, etc. Right? And so that is what's happening in the basin. It's feeding the streams throughout the year. So if we take that and define that then as a surface and say we're going to manage that surface, that then provides that additional assurance that we're not having an unintended effect while we're also extracting less groundwater. So go ahead, Tim. So again, let me give you an example here. On the top, this is actually a graphic that the state has used. They're saying a lot of regions are proposing we're just going to monitor the well right next to the stream. And they're saying that's great. But what about the next well out and the next well out? Something could be happening out here that you're not even looking at. And sometime down the road, right? And again, in the Central Valley, this is years and years. For us, this is a shorter time scale. This could be on the course of a year. But what we're proposing, and so these red lines then represent where water would be flowing, right? And so if water levels got drawn down really far here, water would flow because we're introducing a higher gradient. It's going to want to flow more in that direction. So we're trying to manage to those levels. And now to give you a local example, so here's a topography map here, and this flows through Newell Creek, Ziente, right, across there. And these are actual water levels that we have. So this cross section is not to the right vertical and horizontal scales, but it gives you an idea. So this is Newell Creek here and Ziente Creek here. And what I'm showing on here are the actual monitoring wells that are represented by those dots that fall on that line. And what we can see is that this is SMGWA 6, a new well that we just constructed. So this is an estimated value based on some other historical data that we have nearby. It basically shows that in 2014, and again, this was the time of compliance, right? So what we're saying is we will manage to those 2014 levels. We won't let things drop below those. That would be an undesirable result. So not only will we keep our pumping less than what we were extracting, we will also have this as the base, right? We don't want to drop below this. And so what I'm showing on here is all these elevations, and it shows you that they are above, right, these creek beds. So we know that they've been feeding into the creeks. And so here at this high point, it's flowing off in this direction in Newell Creek, in this direction of the Ziente Creek, and we have a well over here at Olympia. That one's also flowing in. So this is the 2014 level, and we're showing that feeds the creeks, right? It maintains water levels in there throughout the summer. Then I've also shown on here what levels are in 2025. So we're 15 feet higher at this location. We're 11 feet higher at this location. Quail Hollow MWA1 doesn't change by about a foot per year, so that's not surprising. It's a foot higher, and we're 24 feet higher at Olympia. So we're showing that today conditions are more gradient flowing in towards the creek and less pumping. That is what we would expect. So I believe that we can build the case in establishing these as our criteria and have the state and we manage in that fashion. So I'll give an example of how we would define that. So again, we just talked about this. We traditionally look as we have this upper unconfined system, the Santa Margarita, where we have wells. We have a good distribution throughout the basin. Then we have the deeper, more confined system, the Monterey, Botano, Wampico, and that's pretty much confined down to the Scotts Valley area, south of Bean Creek. We just don't produce a lot of water up here because it's just too deep. And there's primarily Monterey formation up there. So there's a lot of domestic wells, but no high capacity wells. So that's why we only have a certain number down in here. Okay. And so we're looking at managing this as two systems. So the upper is the Santa Margarita, and we're proposing to have 12 monitoring wells up there. And the blue are existing wells that we have sustainable management criteria established for in the groundwater sustainability plan. The yellow are the new wells that we drilled, and a handful of other wells that are just out there. They're being monitored on a pretty regular basis, and we can add those to our network.
And these new wells we've drilled are monitoring wells. These are
Dedicated monitoring wells, right? And so all of the ones that we're showing here, the MW indicates it's a monitoring well, right? Or there's one a TW, that's a test well, meaning it's not used as an active production well. So they're much better locations, right? And so what we are proposing to do is the red indicates one that we want to eliminate. So we want to eliminate Olympia 3, which I already explained earlier, and replace it with Olympia 1, which is nearby. It's a former production well, has much cleaner data throughout time. So we're just proposing to switch those two out. They're virtually at the same location. And then the deeper system, the Monterey, Lompico, Putano, we're proposing to eliminate well 15, Scotts Valley Water District well 15. That well has a 400-foot screen interval from 700 feet to 1,100 feet. It sits probably about 25 feet away from a new production well, Jacinto. It's not going to be good for monitoring purposes. So again, we've seen the same sorts of variability that we see at like Olympia 3. So we're proposing to eliminate that. But again, we're adding in new wells to the network. And some of these are wells that Scotts Valley Water District have been monitoring for 20 years. So we have a good lengthy timeline on those. So what does it all mean? So we have these things that we have to establish, the minimum threshold, the things that we don't go below, and the measurable objective, the place we'd like to be, right? So in the shallow zone to Santa Margarita, the MT as we defined it in our previous groundwater sustainability plan was the average of the 5 lowest measurements of groundwater. In a lot of cases around here, I see late 80s, early 90s happen to be the lowest. 2014, surprisingly, wasn't always the lowest measured water level, because again, you could see we were declining going into that period. So for example, at Whale MWB, the current MT is 449 feet of elevation. We're proposing to actually increase it to 453. So we're being more conservative. So again, we're offering up to the state that will raise where we want those minimum thresholds to be. And we've already compared this to existing information and where we are today, and it's not really going to constitute a lot of risk for us to increase those. So I think that the state would accept that. So we're going to adjust the minimum thresholds to 2014 values. And again, you can see in bold, dark, that means that they came up, and in some cases by quite a bit, from 381 feet to 396 feet. But again, it's still protective. We can still make those given our current operations. Again, similarly then in the deeper zones, a lot of these water levels will come up, but again, we've shown you that things have been recovering for years, so we're in really good shape. So there's very little risk associated with increasing the MT. And then the measurable objective, they're pretty much staying the same in the Santa Margarita. That was based on 2004 water levels, and there was a certain amount of reasoning to that, which I thought was still appropriate. It followed a series of 3 normal years. And so they felt, hey, after 3 normal years, that's where I'd like my water levels to be. So that's based on real data. So I kind of like that approach. Now, originally, we had been modeling the deeper zones based on a project. And those, in some cases, I thought maybe a little too ambitious for where they wanted to be. So in looking at the way they approached this, we took the deeper zones and we used levels from 2006. And the reason we proposed to do that is because we had 3 normal years and added on a wet year. In the deeper zones, it takes longer, right, that hydrology for them to respond. So 2006 levels are what we propose to use here. And again, I think that they're going to work out pretty well for us. So we have a dozen in the shallow unconfined system and 11 in the deeper system. So it's pretty good coverage. And the way then we would define the undesirable result.
I think there might have been a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think both Brian and I did. Go for it, Brian.
Jump in around.
If it's okay,
Yes.
I just want to, so I've seen this before because I was on the work group, and I just want to call out and maybe invite you to explain a little bit in further detail. Just prior to this slide, you showed 4 different wells where there's been substantial recovery over the past 10 years, 12 years since Sigma passed and we got to work on this stuff. many of these are also showing recovery. I think the four ones we saw on the prior slide that are recovering, I think they're on this list too. And I guess I also just wanted to point out for those who might not be familiar with the color coding and stuff, it's not like yellow is bad and red is even worse. Right?
Well, red means eliminated, right?
Yellow is
Yeah.
a new well, and
Yellow is-
red is,
Right.
we don't find this as a useful monitoring well. None of this is reporting report card condition of wells or water levels in red.
Rob, I know one of the questions that we had discussed in the ad hoc committee, and I think I had missed maybe the meeting where you addressed it, was the idea was to run your basin model for 5 years of drought and to really see if the new minimum thresholds that you're proposing are those really safe as we believe they are, or could in an extended drought situation, could we actually be getting into trouble?
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, that'll be my last report. We're still gonna run that projected model. That's one of the on the to-do list. So all of this is still draft. Talking about approaches, there may be adjustments, and we would report adjustments that we would need to make at our next meeting.
Thank you.
I just have a question, just educate me. So raising the minimum thresholds, like, I guess I don't understand the benefit of raising them. Why do we want to do that?
Well, again, I think the state would accept that approach because they represent those 2014 levels, which they
Okay.
insist. When it
Okay,
comes to depletion of interconnected surface water, that's the compliance point.
okay,
So we're offering up that we will increase those MTs to 2014 levels. Because I can tell you, the state is fixated on you defining the volumes of depletion. The volumes of depletion are irrelevant. It's whether or not you're inducing additional depletion from that point.
mhm,
And so I want to offer up something that it's kind of hard to argue against, right? We're saying these were the conditions. We're going to stay above those. And we're going to extract less. So we were hoping that we'll get, acceptance of that in the absence of having guidance from them. We don't want to go through all these modeling exercises that they would have you do forever. That's not management,
yeah,
right? Running models, thinking about these kinds of things, that's not management. Management is saying, we had a condition and we're going to set this as our criteria and we're going to learn to adjust to that. Right, we have well fields, Olympia and Quail Hollow. They're really good about being able to move back and forth. Scotts Valley Water District is putting 2 new wells online. They're gonna have a lot more flexibility in managing these conditions. So if we move into year 1 and we're starting to see we're dropping below these, then we're gonna start making those adjustments. And that's why we started talking right now. As I said, every spring, we're gonna give that report. And I know Scotts Valley Water District gets one too, a lot of detail, and they plan their operations for the coming year. Right? That's the important part. It's really saying, here's what we establish this, and we're gonna make those adjustments to that.
okay, so one more question, so are all the MP numbers gonna be at 2014, or is there some that aren't?
They're all intended to be 2014. Some of these wells didn't exist in 2014, so we're kind of using surrogates, we're using a
Yeah.
little bit of modeling, but yes, that's the approach.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, you can see in some cases, well, there's only one case that didn't change at all, right? But they didn't change by a whole lot in a lot of these wells. Even in some of these, they're pretty similar, so.
Okay, thanks.
Everything kind of well is affected by our pumping, Scotts Valley's pumping, and we had a proposed well, deep well.
Yeah.
Is there any life to that well, and can we get a grant for it? Because I
Yeah,
think that would be a
it's
better.
It's still on our list, and about almost 2 years ago, I applied to the state's technical services program. And they have a driller on call, and essentially they've said it's way down the list. So
Oh, they come out and.
they would come out and do it. The expense of a well that deep, a good monitoring well that deep, is somewhere in the $300,000 range. So even this type of grant that we've been talking about wouldn't even cover that, right? So we're still hoping to get some support through the technical services program for something like that.
Okay,
Yeah, still on the list. When we do this new GSP, we're still gonna identify that as a thing that we'd like to have some data on. Yeah, at Vine Hill School, essentially, right now.
So all of this, Rob, is how we're eliminating some of our stream flow monitoring.
Yes,
So
yeah,
I just
again, I'll-
think that it doesn't make sense.
the whole point is that we are assessing that whether or not we are depleting the streams by managing these water levels and managing our pumping in combination. So,
But we're also adjusting how we define that undesirable result, right?
Yes.
Very importantly.
yes.
and again, what's the reason for the change?
Well, for starters, they told us that what we already had wasn't acceptable. And
Yeah.
then secondarily, you know, as I said, they have been messaging, even though they haven't come straight out and said it. Yeah, we don't think just putting a well right next to a stream and monitoring that well is really going to be successful in monitoring for this indicator.
Okay. Got
So, yeah, so,
They've alluded to the 2014 as being what they're eventually going to use.
they have, they're not necessarily the water level itself, but they've been explicit that that is the point of compliance.
Yeah.
So whatever your depletion was in 2014. Now, they might ask you, well, what was your depletion? You can't measure depletion like that. Nobody can. It's a fool's errand, okay? Anywhere. So it's essentially, it's a different approach. It's saying, we know what the conditions were, and we're gonna maintain better than, right, those conditions. That's the only way that you can address whether or not you are having additional stream depletion. We're also very fortunate we're in a small basin with no neighbors. They're gonna question all the other larger basins. Well, what about 50 years from now, when the pumping down in Bakersfield shows up in your well in Fresno? You know, I mean, it's gonna be nonstop. Here, things are happening, it's a pretty nicely constrained, right? Geological basin. So I think we're in a much better position to take this sort of approach. And we're gonna use it for groundwater levels already. So it's not like it's different data that we're gonna be collecting. So I'll explain that too.
And we're saving everyone a bunch of money.
Yeah.
By not having to do that stream flow monitoring.
The stream flow monitoring, which again was valuable and very helpful, but again, it's not something that was required by Sigma. And it's not something we're actually using to judge our success by. Those stream gauges were not a representative monitoring point that we were using to build our case as to whether or not we were in compliance. So it goes to this. So again, I will kind of ignore in the middle is what our definition currently was. And again, the state said you can't have this non-drought year exclusion. You know, you just have to get rid of it. Now, in our case, we said if this happens at any point, and I would argue any point is a little extreme. We showed you, especially in Santa Margarita, we have really nice broad distribution around the basin. Saying a single well is dropping below a level, that's not a basin-wide crisis. That's not basin management. That's micromanagement, and that's never the intent of Sigma. So I'm also proposing we change that approach. And here now we have a definition. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but it's this. So groundwater extraction in one or more aquifers exceeds its minimum threshold, its value that we've established. That number is still to be finalized with our model, but basin-wide, it's somewhere around 2,800 acre feet. A portion of that's Santa Margarita, and then we have these other aquifers. I would propose we combine those aquifers into a single number. It's just too complicated sitting and saying, well, what about the Lompico this year and the Butano this year? And you know, that's operationally kind of constraining. So again, we'll talk about that at the next meeting, and the ad hoc will talk about that as we get modeling results. But I would propose that we would combine those. So the second would be groundwater elevations in 3 or more of the representative monitoring points. Those are the wells. Fall below the MT in 2 consecutive years in the shallow system, right? So we have that dozen wells up there. If 3 wells or more, so it's 25%, fall below, then we have an undesirable result. After year 1, if we're already there, we're gonna be talking to you about what can we do this year? I mean, again, I'm very comfortable that we're not gonna get to that point. even in the 5-year drop. So we still have to work on that conjunctive use project, right? But, and then lastly, groundwater elevations in 3 or more RMPs fall below in the deeper confined system for 2 consecutive years. So if one of those conditions exists, so Lompico Butano, they don't really feed a lot of streams. I mean, there are exceptions way up in the hills. But what happens there is if you draw water levels down in Lompico Butano, well, water level in the Santa Margarita is going to want to go down, right? And so out here off of Mount Herman Road, that's why we see Santa Margarita has been completely dewatered because water has been dropping down to the Lompico there. So we want to pay attention to those two as a separate topic. So that's more of the definition. And I think it's a whole lot easier to implement than it probably sounds, but that's what we would monitor. Okay. Okay, so in doing that, that allows us to address our surface water monitoring. And the recommendation coming out of the ad hoc is first to discontinue the existing dry season monitoring we've been doing at the 6 stations. So again, we have a really good gauge that's monitored year round at San Lorenzo River at Big Trees. It's a good indicator for what's happening, the conditions in the basin. A lot of these tributaries, we don't need to continue to monitor because we're going to be monitoring all these wells near them. Okay. So we're not going to do that as a matter of general practice. However, if one of our wells nearby, Newell, Ziente, or Lower Bean Creek, that's where we know we have a close interconnected surface water groundwater system. If we see them approaching an MT, we'll begin additional monitoring in the well. Okay. And then we'll watch through the season. So we're going to catch our fall measurement. We'll do additional monitoring. We will also track the weather. If it doesn't get wet during the winter, we will prepare to have a consultant on call to begin that monitoring of that particular reach that looks iffy the next year, so that we'll see what's happening with flows there. So we have a backup plan if we need that. And then lastly, we will coordinate. The city of Santa Cruz recently had a habitat conservation plan approved by NIMS, National Marine Fisheries Service. I think is still being approved by the state Fish and Wildlife, but we expect that soon. So that includes a monitoring component. Many of you, your agencies are already contributing to steelhead monitoring. That's salmonids. Thank you, salmonids. In the basin, and I know the cities are, the county, the water districts are already contributing to that monitoring. Part of what the city is doing is evaluating that monitoring and seeing what, if anything, needs to be adjusted with respect to that. What sort of habitat monitoring also needs to happen, what potentially is sort of flow. And so as they're evaluating that, we've agreed to continue talking to them about, what is an effective monitoring program that is in our mutual interest, right? And that would be potentially still just the agencies continuing to contribute to that, or it could be in the form of the groundwater agency being a part of it, but not just doing it for monitoring's sake. Okay, so there still will be a discussion to be had there, because this is ultimately what we all want. We want healthy streams for our environment here locally. That's our next topic, is groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring. So groundwater dependent ecosystems are generally areas where it's less than 30 feet to water, or in our case, springs, where water is flowing at the surface. So in those locations, you have a lot of habitat, particularly riparian vegetation that's reliant on that, right? And so you want to protect the groundwater system. So to date, since we adopted the plan, the county has been going out, and we do appreciate it, and been sending their staff out twice a year and monitor these spring locations. They're very challenging to actually get a good quantified measurement out of a linear type of system. They're also looking at the vegetation, and I don't know if they're experts in this, but it's a head scratcher. I don't know, does it look any better this year than it did previously, right? So you're here on the ground, right, in the weeds, looking at this. There's another approach that uses satellite imagery, and this is commonly used around the state. The Nature Conservancy actually developed this tool. It's called TNC GDE Pulse. And what they use is satellite imagery. It's an index called the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. They look at the color bands from satellite imagery, and based on the differences from flight to flight, and they're looking at year to year in this case, they can indicate whether or not vegetation looks healthier or less healthy than it did. And in this case, on this overhead of Quill Hollow, the blue indicates things are healthier. And this is a measurement for 2021 compared to 2025. So conditions 4 years after that are now better. the yellow is neutral, and the orange and red, that means it's worse. A lot of cases we find orange and red where somebody cleared a parcel, built a house, or there was a small fire, you know, so it's not always related to groundwater, but it's a pretty good indicator overall, staying up at a high level. And this is essentially, this has been maintained by TNC ever since that point. We anticipate they'll continue it. Even if they didn't, there is some free imagery that can be readily available. So we're really just proposing we change the approach. We'll keep an eye on those areas using this method. So it won't save the agency a lot of money, but it will certainly save some time that the county has been providing in time, which I'm sure comes with an opportunity cost for their staff. So that's what we're proposing. We'll replace that on the ground monitoring with this. And again, if we see something alarming happening, great, we'll get the boots on the ground and we'll take a look at what's happening. Okay, so that's interconnected surface water. That's a lot, wasn't it?
Thank you.
But
Just to stop now, any questions on that whole?
it's not an approach that I have seen anybody take.
You're a pioneer.
But it's one that, again, I think fits this basin and the conditions that we have. And again, just the initial conversations that I've been having with the state, I think, you know, the hope is that it's gonna be acceptable. If not, we'll deal with it in 5 years.
I haven't quite gotten my question
Yeah.
together, but as a person who works with plants every day, I'm sort of concerned with the high level summary photographing, whereas the endangered plant may be way down here and the willow is sucking all the water out. I'm wondering if we could continue the in-person test, evaluating for a few representative things to ground truth the overhead summary surveys or something like that.
But you know what I'd like to do is actually talk to the city when they're working on their monitoring program and see what is of mutual interest and something like that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
One more.
Yeah.
I know Quail Hollow in particular, there's a lot of volunteer restoration efforts. So to me, that's also another question because other areas are not gonna have that level of intensity of volunteer restoration.
Right.
So I just wonder how Quail Hollow compared to other areas.
I will have the regard to that. I haven't looked at that myself. It kind of depends on when you look at the timeline, right? Like post fire, it looks really bad, right? But then if you start looking at the more recent years, there's a lot of recovery that's happening. So even that can get skewed. But we do have the other areas I'm showing you, we do have the imagery. I just showed you an example. I haven't looked at that data yet.
Actually, I have another question sort of related to the sandhills, which is the vegetation change. I mean, it's changed that maybe matters, but it's one of the things about the sandhills is that there's a lot of vegetation that we don't want there to be any at all. And so if we're suddenly looking at there's a lot of vegetation and there's not, I guess that would just prompt a in-person review.
Yeah, I basically think if I looked at the image that I just saw, Quail Hollow, I go, nothing to see here. I'm not concerned. If I see something, that's when we need to follow up and understand why. Again, come from the Sacramento area and the American River Parkway is just famous for homeless encampments starting a fire.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and I'm looking at the same data on this same website and it's showing that the vegetation's been degraded. So that's not groundwater, right? So yeah, you have to, at the end of the day, especially if you see things that are happening that you don't want to be happening, you'll have to follow up.
So I think bottom line, we're not in charge of the vegetation. We're not there to make sure X number of types of plants are growing. We're just there to make sure that water.
Our job is to manage the water levels.
Right.
Right. At the end of the day, right, that is what our job is. And again, that's what we would be looking at there too. Am I seeing a decline in a nearby monitoring well that would support that as well? So.
One quick point to raise question. Most of the sandhills is not a groundwater dependent ecosystem anyway, so.
Right, I guess my point is if there is no vegetation, then when you see whether there is none or there is some that, I don't know, then it's gone or something like, but that would be the same as a fire. It's not indicating it's not indicating a problem or a lack of a problem. So if you have a territory where there is no vegetation to speak of, then it's not giving you any information, right?
Yeah, it is. It's part of the challenge, you know, the groundwater sustainability agencies have been tasked with sort of everything, explaining everything, right? And again, in this case, we're fortunate that we've narrowed it down to the 5 sites that we have, right? That we're just gonna focus on those. So again, if necessary, we can do the field work, but you know, for the time being, we're gonna focus on the more efficient way of looking at it.
Just before you move on, I'd also just like to compliment you on speaking to the younger generations by making this nice Minecraft map.
Okay, yeah. So, that leads us, we'll bounce around to RC number 2, which is groundwater levels, right? And again, if the focus was remove the drought year condition. So, okay, we'll do that. Go ahead, Tim. So I don't have to spend a lot of time here, other than to say that we will use that same network that we're using for interconnected surface water for general groundwater levels. And again, we're not gonna focus on how much we're extracting this time. We're just gonna look at the groundwater level. So again, it's 3 or more RMPs falls below for 2 consecutive years in the shallow unconfined system, or 3 or more RMPs falls below in the deeper confined system. So it's the nice thing is we're gonna be taking care of both things at the same time. So recommended corrective action number 3. Again, another fairly challenging one. This is degraded groundwater quality. And in our case, you know, sort of a misinterpretation on our part said, you know, it's not a problem if we didn't cause it. And the state wholeheartedly disagrees with that. If you have groundwater quality issues in your basin, you have them, right? Whether or not you caused them. So we had to change this. But we did want to focus on what you call constituents of concern. What are the problems in your basin? So I don't have this table, but if you recall this existing groundwater sustainability plan, we monitor for everything, right? I mean, we're total salt solids, chloride, iron, manganese, arsenic, nitrates, and all of these volatile organic compounds. All of those volatile organic compounds and all the wells we've been monitoring for all the years we've been monitoring, we've had 1 detection. So I would argue that's not a constituent of concern, right? That's not that we don't care about contamination like that, but you just don't define all of these compounds and just sit and, you know, try to pretend that you're doing something to monitor those. So I want to change the approach as we're doing this. Go ahead, Tim. So we've talked about this prior. I do believe we need to monitor for total dissolved solids, arsenic, and nitrate. Those are issues that we know big picture are or could be a problem in this basin. Also redefine the sustainable management criteria. And again, one of the things that we did here was we defined measurable objective as the average concentration for a constituent in any given one from 2013 to 2017. And today we're above those. Well, how are you going to get back to that? How's your measurable objective going to improve that condition, right? Degradation of groundwater quality means don't make it worse, right? So we're taking an approach that we say, let's establish what our baseline condition is for a constituent at a location. And we can allow it to get this much worse. That'll be the measurable objective. And if it gets this much worse, that's a problem. That's the minimum threshold. Okay, so it's a different approach. That is a more common approach taken throughout the state. So the approach that we did using some historical level and saying we're going to get back there in some miraculous way really wasn't going to work for us as a measurable objective. However, even though we're doing this and we're limiting the number of constituents, we still have a process in place. We will review because we only have 11 production wells. It doesn't take long, and I'll give you an example, to look at every one of these every year for everything that's being monitored. And it becomes pretty apparent when something's a problem, right? So we'll look for anything where they have a detection of a volatile organic compound. So something that's going to be in gas stations or dry cleaners, things like that. Or anything that exceeds a maximum contaminant level, something that has a health standard associated with it. We will also, and then we'll follow up with the agency. Hey, what did you see there? Is that a problem? What are you doing to monitor, et cetera? And then we have an annual meeting with the County Site Mitigation Program, which is a program that takes over all known contaminant areas, right? And I found historically, the regulators, people that are overseeing contamination, don't always talk to the water resource suppliers, the water agencies. So there's a disconnect in communication, right? I don't know if this county site mitigation program does know about that single detection in well 11. I don't know if they do, because it's nowhere near a known contaminated site. So sharing information, I think, will be more effective in the long term. And they can tell us, oh yeah, we had a new site open up over here. You might want to be watching out for that, right? So it's going to be a two-way exchange of information, I think, more effective in the long run. Good. So again, here's just a quick, you can go on Division of Drinking Water's website. You can pull out an Excel spreadsheet. I've got links set up to already all these wells in just about 3 hours. I can go through every one of these and look at all the data for last year. It's no big problem. All the data for anything that was monitoring that well is available. As part of the exercise, we went through and pulled in some of the bigger constituents like manganese. If we're gonna get rid of manganese, then I should show it's not increasing, right? So we did statistical analysis. It was stable to decreasing. It wasn't a problem. Total dissolved solids, it turns out, are increasing in a lot of the wells. And that's not really surprising. As you reuse water, then it's going to gain some additional dissolved constituents in it. So we do want to pay attention to TDS. So that's the approach that we went through. Sorry. And we ended up, again, working with the committee. Go ahead, Tim, I'm going to go forward to the next slide. And what we did here was I pulled the 3 highest values measured in all of these wells to make sure that one wasn't an outlier. So we weren't trying to create an average of those levels, but we were trying to say what's the highest value and what are the next 2 closest levels to make sure that it's not just a one-off in terms of experiencing. That's could you go back one, Tim, to total dissolved solids? So each one of these then has a sort of a customized approach to dealing with it. We've got all the production wells that we're monitoring in the basin, and as new wells come online, we just follow the same process. Once we have enough data, we would establish a level for Graceway or Jacinto, which will be coming online in the near future. So we look at the values, we say, okay, so if Quail Hollow, they're in the 150 kind of range, say, you know, we could still let that go to 250. 250 is very safe, right? Total dissolved solid is really just an aesthetic base. It's not really a health-based standard anyway, which is 500, right? So in this case, we're proposing just kind of round these. Don't try to be perfect with it, but say we can allow for some degradation in each one of these wells based on whatever their baseline conditions. So we have, let's see, the highest TDS is an Olympia 3, and that was at 740 milligrams per liter. So we could accept that going up to 900, which is still below even what our previous standard was. And then it can go up to these amounts. In some cases, we're proposing to lower those, right? From 1,000. So the existing was 1,000. I say we keep that lower if we can, right? You don't really want to get your total dissolved solids to 1,000 because from there, it's not good. This is not water. It is still considered safe for drinking, but you're going to know it when you're drinking it. You're not really going to like the taste of it. So we want to try to maintain things lower, but allow for those that are already high to go up to that previous MT. So it's a more simplified approach. Good.
And Rob, is a trigger a single instance, or is there again an average or over
So
time?
a desirable result would again be the 2-year
2-year.
at relocations. Yeah. Go back to arsenic. So again, the other one would be arsenic, and generally speaking, arsenic's not a problem, but we do have some wells. You know, Pasatiempo 8 already has concentrations of 11. Scotts Valley 11B already has concentrations up to 12. So we have to recognize those were naturally occurring. It is exceeding the health standard, but water is not being served to customers, right? It's either being blended, treated, or et cetera. That is not what a customer's getting. But we do have to care about what it's like in the basin, right? So we can say, well, it can get a little bit worse and maybe get a little bit worse, you know, beyond that. But so in this case, this is one that's actually exceeding the current MT because we're not going to go back naturally and get those water levels back down to there. There's no system. We do concern ourselves if you create conditions that would potentially release arsenic if it was being stored on some of the sediments. So we do want to be aware of that. So in some cases, we have a non-detection, typically meaning it's either below 1 or 2, depending on the laboratory method. if we have those, we want to keep them there. So we want to keep those at 2, very conservative, and keep them like at 5 for an MT. So it just kind of goes through and tries to keep everything below 10 because that is the health standard. But for the couple of exceptions, you know, that's just something that could happen, and we'll keep an eye out for that. And last constituent is nitrate. And again, in most of our wells, we have non-detects, ND, right? So it's below what the lab's even measuring. We have some occasions, we have 5A is 2. That's still well within the health standard, which is 10, okay? So in this case, if it's already non-detect, we want to keep it at 2. In the case of quail, it's already above that. Let's try to keep it at 4. And then in this case, we have a proposed MT for all of them at 5. And that is well better than the health standard. The reason for that, and I think it was good logic in the groundwater sustainability plan, is because we're concerned the groundwater is feeding the creeks. And the creeks to have a standard, it's called a total max daily load, allowable of 5 for nitrates. So we don't want to create conditions that are worse than the creek. So it's not necessarily health-based. So we want to keep what we already had proposed for that. So those are the 3 that we would monitor on that regular basis. And if 3 or more of those RMPs exceed the MT for the same constituent. Now, if you're already exceeding some of these levels, you're going to be having to sample quarterly. So you're going to be sampling more frequently, but as an agency, we'll be tracking that information. So in some cases, especially TDS, there are some operational changes that we know. We already know with Scotts Valley, you can make some changes because we do know we have some formations either above or below. We're producing a lot of water. And it could be that they're just bringing in some poor quality water from, let's say, the Monterey Formation. And by essentially changing operations, allow water levels to recover, you can actually help improve like things like TDS. So, okay. Okay, so that's the water quality sustainable management criteria.
So no benefit on that one to split the shallow unconfined versus.
No, and mostly because these wells are already just in that pretty deep stuff, right? I mean, we only have a handful of wells. The Quail and Olympia would be the only ones that are exclusively in the Santa Margarita,
Okay.
right? Sitting out there. Yeah. And in that case, and again, in this case, we have 11 wells basin wide, right? We're not using monitoring wells in this case. We're using the production wells. So not as many, so it didn't make as much sense to try to split them up in any way. We will be adding a couple more, as I said, as those new wells come online. So we'll be dealing with 13 wells.
We just added a lot of buffers to make the state happy, right? So that would seem like something that would be an added advantage to us if it made any sense, but it doesn't, yeah. Okay.
And these are raw water monitoring.
Yes, and because again, the concern is not what your customers are having, it's what's in the basin. That's why we look at the raw. Yeah, wouldn't do me much good if you're giving me reports on coming out of a treatment plant, right? You know, oh yeah, look at this, it's beautiful. Like, oh, that's not in the basin. So. So again, moving on to another topic, and this one, it may not be terribly important, but again, I need the board to know about this. I mean, the state takes the sustainability goal really seriously. I don't know if we all take that as serious. I mean, you know, for us, it's focusing in on the sustainable management criteria. A goal's a goal. You can make it stated. But because of the changes that we've made, it's necessary to revise the sustainability goal for the plan. You know, so it's kind of a big deal, in particular in the eyes of the state. Just included in your packet what the original was, what the new one is. We don't need to do any wordsmithing tonight. It's a disclosure, and it essentially, when the draft comes out, you can, you know, focus in if you don't like my word choice. But you know, essentially, it's just disclosed to you. This is essentially what we're trying to achieve, right? So again, I think it's important for the board to see it because it's going to be changing in the updated plan.
So if you were to summarize what the difference is between what had been proposed, I guess, 5 years ago versus what we're now.
I would say it's shorter and it takes out the caveats. Because again, it's well, as long as it's not too expensive, or it's, you know, if we didn't cause it, you know, that kind of, it took out these exceptions that are in there and they're just gone, right? And it's basically, what do we stand for, right? We stand for strong community, economy, and environment. We're gonna do it by doing these things. So it's structured pretty close to the same as the old one. It's just a little less wordy. And again, I said a little less, sort of defensive in some ways, yeah.
Well, and really, you've effectively taken it from 9 or 10 bullet items to 5.
Shorted down, yeah,
Shorted
so,
down,
yeah.
I noticed that you've taken out, enhancing groundwater availability, et cetera, et cetera. It, on the old one, it says maintaining and enhancing groundwater contributions to, what are those?
Yeah.
That and the other,
And because because we can't promise on that. Right, so we do have things like expanding conjunctive use and drought response, but we can't guarantee that it's gonna result in enhancing those conditions. So we wanna maintain, right, and it's tying into that concept of Sigma that says January 1st of 2015 is when we judge you by. So that's,
okay,
Yeah.
I'd like,
Slightly
I'd
different
like
approach,
a
yeah.
goal
yeah.
for us as an agency that is to improve things, but maybe it shouldn't be in this document.
Exactly, there's the things that you're gonna do to comply with the law, right? And then there's the things that we wanna do here, right? So,
I guess I agree with Ruth. I noticed the change from enhancing to maintaining only. Previously maintain and enhance. And from a goal setting perspective, I think it's appropriate to enhance. I think that we have an obligation to future generations to try to undo some of the indulgences of the past 40 years. And even though we're only required to address stuff since 2014, I think that we are doing better. Our consumption is way down. Water levels are rising, and that's as it should be. And I guess I don't see a problem with having a goal that aspires to something, even as we keep our target thresholds and the quantitative criteria by which we will be judged exactly the same, as if we did not have that word in the goals.
okay,
Yeah.
and good,
It's
you
the
know,
only thing
yeah.
topic of significant discussion at the time we
Yeah.
set this.
Okay.
Yeah, it was before your time. But I think there was consensus around the idea that these were aspirational.
There was, and the only thing I would argue against that is each of the water agencies has those aspirational goals. It's not really up to this agency to do that. The individual agencies, because they're the ones that are gonna be doing the project and management actions to begin with, right? The Scotts Valley, we have very grand plans to, help our aquifer. And because this is an agency that is really just being put under the microscope by the state, we might want to consider not promising what we can't deliver.
Or
What
we
someone
take
else
credit
has
for
to
your
do.
fine work. Take credit for your fine work.
So I would put this in the category of duly noted. It is not a done discussion. I do think, for example, when it comes to interconnected surface water, I think as long as we're clear, it's enhanced compared to the conditions that existed prior to Sigma. Right, because I don't think we can necessarily enhance it from where we are today, right? So I think we can try to strike a balance with things that are achievable. So let's, again, ad hoc, we'll revisit that. Duly noted comments.
I would just want to echo, I think what Chris has just mentioned, when it comes to regulators, I'm always a little bit concerned about shooting too high and it coming back somehow to come back at us. That, oh, you guys actually didn't enhance it.
Yeah.
You only maintained it, but you promised you were gonna enhance it. I mean, I don't know if that really would ever happen. But it really,
Well,
you know.
I can tell you that you may have stakeholders that feel a different way too. And
That's
even
true.
if the state says you're compliance, it can still become a problem for you from different organizations that might represent some of those interests and say, well, you promised to enhance this. Where is it? So it can go beyond complying with the Sigma law. So again, let's continue that discussion.
If I could just, one other thing, I guess, as we pursue further that discussion, having an understanding of what is the meaning of a goal, isn't it an obligation or could it be aspirational? How's that viewed in the eyes of the regulators would be interesting. The other thing that I'll just point out is that the very specific language about cost effective uh, is appealing, I'm sure, to certain stakeholders, in a way that the more general language about economy, may be less tangible. And, having a nod in our goal to being cost effective, might be helpful.
Speaking of taking credit, so these are some very smart and creative approaches that also make it more succinct. Are you primarily responsible for coming up with these?
This,
Yeah.
well, we
These
started
approaches.
with the beginning goal. I mean, we tried not to change too much
Yeah.
and Tim provided some
Okay.
good edits in there.
Who owns this IP?
Royalty, it's mainly Rob on this one, the revision.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Just nice to take this in bites. Any questions from the public? Thank you.
Okay, so. Next topic, Tim. Again, it's not the last time you're gonna see it. So projects and management actions. I just want to get big picture for tonight. We have 20 projects and management actions organized in 3 groups with some cases 3 tiers, and it's really just kind of complicated. I think we can simplify this. And the reason I say it first and foremost, it's complicated is because when we said we have these 20 projects, we have to report on these every year. You know, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing something, et cetera. So I think it boils down to, and again, this was an approach that I took in my former basin that I was managing. These group 1 are things that we've already done. You've already achieved the water use efficiency. And so you shouldn't be continuing to report, we achieved water use efficiency from some date, right? So a lot of these group 1s, I would propose that we don't really characterize them as projects we need to do for the GSP. We're just going to characterize them as things we have done already, right? And that's, again, appropriate. That's been done at my former basin. The data won't get lost because we report on the storm recharge, the recycled water, and conjunctive use. So it's already, that data, it gets reported to the state. So it's not like we'll lose that information. We just won't have to report on those projects. Then moving down into group 2, these tier 3, all of these were purified wastewater. So this isn't recycled water. This is taking recycled water and then treating it even further into purified wastewater. And back in the day, there were still some possibilities that something like this could happen. None of the agencies that spoke, for these any longer believe that they would be cost effective or feasible in any way, shape, or form, or necessary in this basin, given the conditions that we have.
Plus, we didn't have an intertie project at that time.
Right, now you have an intertie for potable water, right? So that really changes things. And so essentially these group 2, and again, rather than referring to them as tier 1 and tier 2, it's the SLV conjunctive use program. It's Scotts Valley intertie and conjunctive use program with the city. Those are the things that are happening, right? And we're going to focus on those. And then group 3, some of those will fall out. I'm not going to talk about those tonight, but those are at the request of the project proponent. Hey, I don't really think I want to put a well there anymore, right? So that would be up to the project proponent. We're just trying to streamline this, right? We should end up with, 8 to 10 projects, right? That we're focusing on, with these being the heart, because that's really what we're going to do. Group 3 are just sort of a backup if things don't work out the way that we anticipate that they will. So that streamlining is to come.
So that's 12 projects there, or there.
Yeah, the other 8 are group 3.
Oh, okay.
They're the backup to the backup. Yeah, so it's, I didn't even bother, sorry, the detail is, again, that's working with the project proponents on, do you want this project in here any longer or not?
Okay.
Then there are a couple of other, I think, important GSP implementation actions that we identified in the plan. And one of them is up front in the introduction. It essentially says, after 2027, we're going to be looking at other sources of revenue from private users. And that could be what we call a non-de minimis, those that extract more than 2 acre-feet, or de minimis, could be a small domestic user. That's in the plan. That's what it says. We have had discussions. I've shown to the board the amount of use from some of these users. We don't really see that there have been any impacts from these users. We don't know that there are a lot of benefits to these users. In particular, they're in the Monterey Formation, a lot of them. It's pretty isolated. The projects that we're proposing to do aren't really affecting the Monterey Formation for better or worse. And so the committee would recommend that we essentially delete this language. It's not necessary at this time. It's not our intent to pursue private sources, that we're going to continue to fund the agency self-funded and focus on cost, right? Again, getting through this hump in particular. Next year, costs go down. We have $110,000 associated with the periodic evaluation and plan amendment. That disappears next year. So pretty significant savings. So that's a first recommendation. The other is that we indicated in GSP section 5.5, we're gonna have a metering program, darn it. And we're gonna make those non-de minimis, those extracting more than 2, put a meter on their well. And again, there aren't many out there. We've shown you this. We can confirm 4 that we know of. We know Quail Hollow Quarry. I talked to their environmental manager. They run it for dust control. They run it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week when they're in operations. They take storm water. They use that when they can. Says, I think we use about 32 acre feet a year. Good enough for me. How much more are we going to improve on that, right? And then we have some mobile home parks. Again, we have a general idea. The use, it's not huge. And is there a lot more to gain by knowing that down to some level of detail, right? And in the aggregate, all 4 of those users would extract well under 90 acre feet a year. Well under, right? And compared to a basin that's extracting about 2,300 acre feet right now. You're not getting a lot of new information from that. It's not making your management more effective, right? So the committee would recommend that we simply eliminate that as a requirement on the agency that says we're going to start a program. Understanding, of course, that the county now has a well ordinance that was adopted last year, and for any new permits issued for non-de minimis uses are going to require to have meters anyway. So if it's a problem that's ongoing, well, it'll resolve itself through time. So we think just kind of back off. It's really not going to be worth the additional effort at this point in time. Doesn't mean the agency can't come and want to revisit this issue at some point. I just don't think we want to put it in our groundwater sustainability plan for the state to say, well, why aren't you doing this? So that would be the recommendation. There's more. There's more, but this is the last one. This is the last one. So things that we're still doing, right? So the ad hoc will continue to meet some. We really are trying, there's schedule next, sorry, I lied, there's 2 more slides. So we are still updating the model. We have to do this for one reason, is that, again, the new wells that Scotts Valley's been drilling, they're focused more in the Butano than they were, and so they're gonna be extracting over the long term more from the Butano than the Lompico, right, that they're currently doing. And so we want to run the model to see what the effects of that are going to be. That's going to change dynamics in the system, so we need to run it anyway. So we do know that groundwater and storage, again, I've already alluded to this, we've assigned a volume to each aquifer. We know that's going to have to change because the planned pumping in the Butano down the road is already going to be higher than is set. I think we should probably combine the 2 and make it simpler. We don't really have a lot of good evidence that there's a significant unit that's between the Lompico and Butano, right? Water can move between them. They're different depositional environments, but there's really no compelling reason other than the Butano's deeper, a little more consolidated in some cases, to really split those 2 out. They're both deep, confined aquifer systems. So that may change that. We're updating the water budget since we're doing this. We're 5 years, we have 5 more years more information. And I've always wanted to take this opportunity because the more I look at the data, right, we're so much better today than we were, even 20 years ago. So in the original version, our historical budget was 1985 to 2018. That was where we were when they started developing this. And the current budget was 2010 to 2018. And then the projected was 2020 to 2072. So now that we have this opportunity, I really like to use Sigma as that indicator, right? So I say we set the historical and we end that at 2014, end of 2014. The current starts with Sigma. And we take, this is actually 11 years worth of data, 15 to 25. And then take 26, which is where we are today, and project that out. We've already run this current budget. And it was really pretty interesting because The current water use, groundwater extraction, when you compare it to what we had in the previous plan, goes from 3,000 average from 2010 to 2018, down to 2,600, 2015 to 2025. It just shows how good we've been. And then the change in storage is now this current period, right? So not contemplating what the future looks like. Our current change in storage is positive 300 acre feet per year. So the original modeling indicated we were at a negative 200 acre feet per year. So I think that that's a positive reflection on what this basin has achieved, right? And we should take credit for that. And I really like that we're going to do that as our current. Now we'll run the projected, which includes those climate conditions, to see how well we fare, right? Under that future, and what do we have to do about that, right? So.
No, that's great. I noticed in the Montgomery and Associates quote that they will not recalibrate the model. And given what you've just said, I assume, are you going to recalibrate it, or?
Yeah, we assume that the calibration is good enough, and that there's no new data that we have that would change that level of calibration. Areas that is difficult to calibrate to are out on the limbs at the top of the hills there in the Butano. Well, there's no new information there, right?
Okay.
So we've drilled a lot of new wells in the Santa Margarita Formation, shallow. We have pretty good calibration in those locations. So really, time and effort was not, worth trying to do a new calibration on the model. So it's all relative to, if this is what it was like, right, back then, just using the big change here really is the new extraction and the new projected extraction, which, by the way, urban water management plans are being prepared by Scotts Valley and San Lorenzo. So we have the advantage of being able to use their new projected demands there as well. So today, I think we're looking at a future of about 2,800 acre feet average per year, as opposed to what would have been about 3,000 acre feet in the previous model. So some of those demand projections have come down. So we still have to run that and look at those results.
I thought the usage was 2,400. Oh, this is including the other.
Today, that, no, 2,400 is extraction in the today time range, right? 23 to 24. 28 is essentially projecting out 40 some odd years now, right? With new demands, yeah.
Okay, got
So
it.
we know we're gonna have some growth, right? So. Okay, so then this time, last slide. Ambitious revised schedule. We're here today. We're getting direction from you all. If we want to attempt to adopt the amended GSP on October 22nd, there is a requirement in the law that we give a 90-day notice to cities and counties affected by the plan. Which means we have to have a notice and pretty much the plan pretty much ready by that July 24, right? So we're talking 2 months from now. So again, we still have a lot of work to do, decisions to be made, amendments to be made, to get to that point. If all goes as planned, we would intend to have a board draft available for public release no later than August 13th. So it'll be 2 weeks ahead of the board, be able to come and have a healthy discussion, get more direction from the board, and have an open comment period for 2 weeks past the board meeting, right? So that would be that, assuming that is relatively clean, things that we can resolve, we should be able to have that board draft October 22nd for adoption. And again, we always have a buffer. We can always have a special meeting because the plan is due on January 3rd. So it's fluid. Again, it's super ambitious. The July 24th makes me a little nervous, right? That's just around the corner. But that's still what we're targeting.
Okay. Any questions from the board? Okay, any questions from the public? Glad you got to hear all that.
So sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
I know in the report, and you mentioned it too, that the model's going to try to account for climate change projections over the next 25, 50 years. How would you summarize, what does that really mean? Because the more I learn about climate change, it's so dependent on regions and micro areas.
Yeah, we
You
already,
can go up, you can go down.
yeah,
So what are we assuming?
we have
for
a local
here?
set.
Yeah.
And I don't think it varies a lot from anywhere else you've heard. A lot of people say, well, actually, it's gonna probably be a little wetter, but it's gonna come in shorter, more intense bursts, right? And then we might have these longer dry periods, right? So if you look at some of these, and we have, again, it's a local one that we've used, we're gonna continue to use it. It'll have a really long 5 to 7 year drought cycle.
Okay.
It'll have some periods like a 2023, right, where it's coming in and just, and it's gone, you know? So it's interesting, just running the model with the 2023 data now, because those storms, it was super wet, right? But some of them came in and they just left. They didn't really recharge the basin as much as you would think that they would have, being almost a historically wet year.
Right.
But you can sure see a lot of flow going out San Lorenzo, right? So, yeah, so that's the gist. It is local data. And so, but that's the general answer for it, so.
And has that changed much in the last 5 years from when the models were running?
Well, we haven't attempted to update that climate data set. That would be pretty,
Oh, really?
that'd be a lift, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so.
I see. All right, thank you.
Okay, all right, well, great work, Rob, and
Yeah.
I thank the ad hoc committee. And, you know, the hours that you guys have all spent doing this, really appreciate it. I just listened at all those meetings. Okay,
So, Chair Perry, I think we would like to get, board approval on this, just because there were elements of what Rob described there, where we wanna, you know, we would like an
okay,
action.
well,
on it, so
we'll wait for, Director Stiles to come back. I don't wanna,
Okay.
leave her out.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we, well, I guess we have to wait for the amendment, the professional services.
We could move on to the next one and.
Yeah, we could just start that. I mean, I think she knows what this is all about.
Sure, okay. So I alluded to this in the budget discussion, but we do have an item on the agenda to approve this year for contract with Montgomery and Associates. I mentioned that this, there was an RFP that was put out, or pardon me, RFQ, request for qualifications, that resulted in their selection. And if the agency was satisfied with the services performed and the proposed budget, that they could elect to approve the year 4 services. And so that's where we are now. The item in the packet does it describes similar tasks to what I described in the budget already. I'll jump to the budget table here and schedule. This is in part of what Rob discussed as well. And so the action or the consideration before the board is to approve the scope of work for next year, and then not to exceed $150,000, $110, and then for the standard practice is to authorize the general manager of Scotts Valley Water District, which is the business entity for the GSA, to execute the amended agreement. And so I'm happy to talk in a little more detail, but I do think we've sort of covered some earlier discussion, so.
This is just about, Ruth, about that Montgomery contract, you know what this is about. And then we're gonna circle back after this, and they wanted an okey dokey on the, they
Sorry,
didn't wanna do it without you.
bad timing.
Okay, so you wanna, can I have a motion for this?
I would move, we approve the amendment for year 4.
Second. Okay, all those in favor?
And we,
Aye.
public, just in case, I don't think there may be, but, let's get public comment just.
Oh, sorry.
Since it's a separate board item, so I'll just double check online. I know we had a few folks on there.
For me.
Okay, no comment in the room, no comment online. Okay, great.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Making it unanimous. Okay, and then back to, we're giving this an indication that we heard what Rob said, and we approve of what he's doing so far, pending what comes back. Okay, is this a motion and a?
It is, give me just, I was gonna pull it up and share it here, so I've got it on my screen, I'm gonna share it just for the benefit of not only the folks online, but what I share here gets pictured up by the meeting recording, so anybody who comes back to watch it afterwards can see it as well, so Yeah, so essentially it is to receive the recommendations and provide direction on the GSP periodic evaluation and amendment. I think we captured, we both through the recording and through the notes, the direction received. A lot of that will come back to the ad hoc. But that's where we are.
Okay, I have a motion that we did that.
I don't know why this is a motion.
Yeah, I know.
Can
we just say?
I'll move that we receive the recommendations and we, really love Rob's aggressive July 24th goal. Hope he makes it.
Okay, Dale seconds it. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, anyone opposed?
Rob.
Unanimous.
Does that satisfy you, Tim?
It does.
Okay, so now we have the initiate solicitation to fill the vacancy for well owner alternate representation. We're gonna appoint an ad hoc committee of 3 directors to facilitate this. I'm assuming we're gonna have the 2 private well owner representatives, and I was impressed into service. The last time to do it, I'll continue in that position, so okay with you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Get the gang back.
so can we have a motion that the board will approve that ad hoc committee?
I'll move that we approve an ad hoc committee for filling the water, I guess the domestic well water director position. Or alternate.
Yes. Okay.
With Frank, Chief, yourself, Chris, and Ian. Yep. Cassidy, okay.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. All those in favor?
And let's get public comment on that one as well.
No, I'm not. Okay, anything? Okay, approved.
Let me look online just to see if we have any hands up online, so, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, unanimous. Staff reports? John, do you have any?
Nothing to add to the.
Okay. And boy, the Santa Margarita Basin implementation activity status, I think we know what's going on.
I only want to have one report here
Okay.
on technical support. We did receive our first well permit application for review.
Oh, I saw
As
that.
an agency, so we
Yeah.
got to policy last year. And, well, I mean, the beauty is, we're gonna see every application that comes in. This was for domestic well, right? And we're not in the business of, we can't tell you yea or nay, but we can certainly say, we have a question about this, you know? So we're gonna know as it's coming in. And it also gives you an idea of the level of activity. We've had one. Right, one, yeah, very exciting.
And did you put a meter on?
Domestic.
I.
Good minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we mount up a posse to go out there and exercise our warrant powers? Yeah.
Okay, Terry?
Yeah,
I think I have something.
I have something new and interesting. So Senate Bill 827 passed and it became effective on January 1, 2026. And that expands on the training requirements for local officials and members of legislative bodies. And I did some research and you all are members of legislative bodies, even the well owners. Because you hypothetically get the right to reimbursement of some of your expenses. That's what makes you, but you're not part of another agency, but so it applies to this organization. And we have had a previous law that said that ethics training had to be conducted. And everybody's familiar with that. But now they're expanding the existing ethics training rules and having a new requirement for fiscal and financial training. So the law says you have to complete 2 hours of ethics training every 2 years. And they're also expanding it to certain designated employees and like general managers and assistant general managers, high decision makers in organizations. I don't believe Tim's organization applies because that's an independent contractor and not an employee. So I think you're spared. The timeline says that if you are currently a member prior to January 1, 2026, you have 2 years to comply. But if you're a new member and just joined as a member after January 1, 2026, you have 6 months to comply. And there are essentially 3 trainings. It's the ethics, the fiscal, and the financial. And if you're a member of a different agency and you took it for that other agency, that will carry over to this. So you don't have to double up multiple meetings. Some of the things that are on our side is that we have new administrative duties. We, staff, must maintain all training records for a minimum of 5 years. And because we maintain a website, we have to detail how the public may request copies of these training records. So some agencies put it at the end of every agenda packet. There's multiple ways you can do it, but we might have to consider how we report training. And so you might be getting reminders and nags and requests to do training. Much of it is online. So that's the latest.
So we currently are, or previously were required to do 2 hours of ethics.
Correct.
Does this mean we do another 2 hours of the other 2 subjects?
Yeah, I think so.
Plus the sexual harassment?
Yes.
Okay.
But
So
that's
it's
it.
4.
The new legislation didn't mention that.
Didn't mention the sexual
Didn't
harassment.
mention the sexual harassment.
And was code of
That's what we're getting
conduct
at.
something required to
It's
do?
existing.
What is the number again?
SB 827, and the required curriculum covers municipal budgets, financial reporting, audited debt management, capital financing, and cash management. And it must be completed at least 2 hours of financial training every 2 years.
Okay.
And is that gonna be on the regular California training website?
Well-
I just did my ethics not too long ago. I didn't see it.
Yeah, so we know we have a neighboring agency that has gone through this, not for the GSA, but for their own board members. And there is a training that's available through the California Special Districts Association. There's a member and a non-member price. Actually, the feedback was that it was an excellent training and that they found it to be very worthwhile. So I think on our to-do list is to follow up and confirm, particularly for those of you with your own member agency, right? What is the timeline? Are you within that 2-year and look at who got appointed when? For the well owner representatives, obviously we'll follow up separately with you guys to make sure that that training is made available. I think the assumption is for many of the member agencies, you're doing those other trainings through your member agency, but we'll follow up.
Thank you.
All right, move on to directors' reports. Does anybody have anything to report from a fabulous conference for?
Nice to be back.
Ruth and I went to the Aqua Conference and I will say, as it's approaching 8 o'clock, there's nothing of earth-shattering news that I'm gonna bore you guys with.
No pictures to share?
Yeah, afterwards. So if there's nothing from anybody, I'll move on. Future items, invitation for board requests for future agenda items. Nothing right now. I know you'll contact staff if you do. Informational items, events calendar, and down to, got a couple of minutes to go. Do I hear a motion?
I move we adjourn.
You can just do it.
I do.
Oh. All right.
Do you want to stay longer? We adjourn. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.